Hi everyone, welcome to Arts Visalia. I'd love to introduce Marty Azevedo. He's an artist out of Stanislaus, California, and is currently showcasing his work in the main gallery of Arts Visalia. Thank you, Marty, for joining us. Go ahead, take the stage.
So thanks for being here, and thanks for hanging the exhibition. It looks great.
Thank you.
To see it in the space. I'll kind of talk about the work in general. I don't know how many people here know about printmaking. I could start with that. So I'll talk a little bit about the process first. So there's primarily, like most of the works in the show, are prints of some sort. Mostly relief prints, which is a process that involves kind of carving out negative space on the blocks, so that the raised surface is the thing that actually prints. It's like it's the oldest form of printmaking that there is. And so the really kind of graphic images that are in there, the ones that are like a little bit more high contrast, have a little bit more dramatic mark making within them, that you can actually see kind of like the chiseled mark making in it. Those are the relief prints. And then there is also some lithography that is happening in there, and those are the images that look a little bit more like color pencil drawings. And that is done through a process of drawing on a piece of limestone with a grease-based pencil. And it's kind of complicated chemistry thing, but the essential component of that is that oil and water don't mix. And so we're printing with an oil-based ink. We keep the surface of the stone damp. While we're printing, the stone's porous, so the water sits where we didn't draw with a grease pencil, and then the oil-based ink sticks to where we drew with something greasy. And so you get this really nice transfer of like kind of a softer sort of mark, which is very different than the relief mark that you see on the other prints. And then there's also some color pencil drawing. So I had a daughter in the last year and a half, or she's a year and a half now, and so my processes have had to change a little bit as far as the studio goes. So like the color pencil drawings are things that I can work on at home without a big bulky press and all the other extra equipment that goes into that, and also doesn't take me away from the house for the long hours that I used to be able to go to the studio and just be there without having to check in with my wife or abandon my wife with the baby for multiple days in a row. So that's been a little bit. I've never really worked with color pencil as like kind of a final medium before, so that's been a little bit of a shift in the process. But I think it's a nice direction for the work, given kind of limitations on space and time that have kind of come along with having a kid. So that's some of the process stuff, but as far as the kind of content of the work and what's there is kind of doom and gloomy if you look at a lot of it. And even the title of the show, We Find Our Account Running, is a little bit doom and gloomy, I guess you could say. And most of the kind of like fodder, there was a question about where the inspiration for the images comes from, and it primarily starts in a sketchbook. So I have a lot of sketchbooks, but I have like kind of one that I'll work in until it's mostly full, and then that gets closed up, and then I go on to another one. But the sketchbook is really like a huge source of my, you could say, inspiration, but it's where I go to anytime I'm generating an image. So the sketches in that sketchbook might be just random images that I've kind of come across, or that popped into my head at the moment, and those kind of end up getting collaged into the final images. So I'll take like images from this page or images from this page, and they come together into the final things that you see there, with some bits added in. And most of these sketches were done during COVID. Like most of the images that came from from this group of images were generated during COVID. So a lot of I guess uncertainty and fear and those sort of things. And then you also have all the wildfires that are happening at the same time. I lived outside of California, like I grew up in Hanford, just south of here, obviously. But I hadn't lived in Hanford or in California for several years before kind of returning. I lived in Ohio for a few years. I lived in Mobile, Alabama for a year. And all those areas are greener and wetter than here. And so it felt like this this really huge shift when I came back to what I guess never felt as dramatic when I was growing up here, right? Everything felt a little bit wetter here. We got rain. The fires weren't something that you would see very commonly, right? And so it feels like the world is changing really rapidly right in front of your face, right? And maybe even more so now having a kid, it's like, okay, well, maybe this stuff isn't going to affect me so much, but what will my daughter deal with as she gets older? And you already see like tension about resources, right? And that's for things like oil, but what happens when it's for water, right? And so I guess the work is me kind of digesting that, or like my way of kind of coping with it and thinking about what that might look like right afterwards, what the world might look like a little bit. And so there was probably a lot of sketching of me on the couch while watching like sci-fi movies, right? and like post-apocalyptic sort of TV shows or things like that. So there might be bits of that in there. And a lot of isolation, right? In the images, the figures are pretty isolated for the most part, and if they are together, they're not really interacting with each other, or it is in some way maybe implying violence between those parties. So that there's a lot of that, like kind of, I guess, discomfort or like this destruction of the natural world that is in those images a lot, whether that's done in a way that's just kind of evolving in the environment, or that's done because of human interaction in those things, or because of things like war, kind of pillaging of the land. And it's not necessarily, they're not like environmental pieces, they're like more of this might be what things would look like, right? And it feels like a very human thing to me to almost kind of take until there's nothing left, right? And there's like a greed without a thought about the implications for what that might mean in 50 years or 100 years, right? It's all about like the immediacy of like, this is good for me right now, but what does that look like in the future? So that's kind of primarily where the work is all kind of sitting and coming from. And I don't know if people have any questions about any of the works specifically.
Regardless of the media that you use, there is like the cohesion in the way that you like render forms and things.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder what, like when you as a youngster started like drawing, thinking like, oh, I really like to do this. Maybe this is something I want to do more in my life as part of your lifestyle or your livelihood.
Yeah.
You know, what are some of the things that you were drawing before you thought about like making art? You know, like just like the things that you were drawing that still influence the way you make art today?
So I probably, like a lot of the drawing that I did when I was younger, before I even considered art, as a career path, is I think it's like a lot of little boys do, is comic books. Like I would draw a lot of like that, I would copy comic books or comic book art, and I think probably the biggest hangover from that would be like my color palette is a lot like kind of, if you look at it, there's like a really similar color palettes, what you might see in like the CMYK
Yeah.
color printing from comic books on newsprint, not like they print on like glossy pages and stuff now. And it's like a way wider range of like colors, right? But there's something about that like kind of desaturated color palette that's like kind of a specific color mixing, you know? And then there tends to be a lot of like male figures, and then they are often maybe a little bit more idealized in some way than like more than like emaciated or anything like that than figures would be. And I used to also use a lot of paneling in the images, which isn't so present.
Paneling?
Like breaking up the images more to like kind of sections, almost like comics. So there would there'd be like a large image and then like other smaller panels that had information kind of contained within those.
Okay.
But I've moved away from that a little bit more to where they're a little bit more cohesive overall.
There's this like border treatment on some of your prints too that has like patches of color.
Mm-hmm.
And as a printmaker, I think about like when I look at a cereal box or something and I see the patches of color.
Yeah.
Is there some reference there to like the colors you're printing, or is it?
A lot of the times they're like pulling from the printed color, like each layer would be in that space, and I think some of that kind of it's something that I've been doing for a while, and I think a lot of it relates to music for me in some way. So like if you're in a studio with me, there's never not music playing, or when I'm drawing, or even at home. Like there's pretty much. I think it's kind of like a rhythm for me around the edge, like of what I was like maybe listening to at the time, and even the like some of the content sometimes comes from music.
Like a verse or a chorus in a song?
Yeah. So like the titles of the work started, there's a album that I listen to a lot when I'm printing in the studio, and it has at the start of some of the songs, it has a lot of Abraham Lincoln quotes from Abraham Lincoln speeches that made me look up the Abraham Lincoln speech, and then basically all the titles from the show are excerpts from the speech, from the Abraham Lincoln speech, and it's like kind of right before the Civil War starts, and he's kind of talking about the Unions like kind of being at jeopardy of falling apart, which feels just as relevant to the idea of kind of the world kind of collapsing in its own way too.
I had a question. So it sounds like you are using visual art to kind of process a lot of these really heavy things that we're all dealing with environmental issues. What was your motivation for using visual art as opposed to spoken word or other kind of activist media?
Yeah, I mean, like almost every other artist with her, I've always drawn, right? I've always drawn, painted, and it's like been the easiest way for me to, I guess, kind of translate my thoughts and ideas. It's like the thing that's always come the most natural. Mm-hmm. I'm terrible at playing any musical instrument that I've ever picked up. I don't think I have the same sort of patience. I know it's like, and I tell this to actually, because I teach, so I tell it to my students. It's like they complain about drawing, like I can't draw. It's like, well, you just haven't learned how to draw, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so it's the idea of the thing that you're interested in, right, or intrigued by, is the thing that you're going to invest energy in, right? And so if you're not invested in it, it's like anybody can learn how to draw a thing really realistically, right, if you want. It's like practice and hours. Like somebody might naturally pick it up just like they might pick up an instrument really quickly, right? But I think, yeah, for me, it's all like drawing has always just been almost like my own outlet for a lot of other things too. So it's, I know, like I can kind of just disappear into a drawing for hours where there's not many other things that capture that same sort of attention for me. That's why there's art therapy, right?
Yes. Any other questions or comments from Marty?
Do you ever draw freely though? I mean, since it seems like you're just sounds like you're just constantly just kind of drawing, you know, moving the pencil around the page, just always doing it. I have a hard time doing that. I like, if I can't make, I'm not like making art, everything's put away. It's like, okay, now it's time to make art. And it's like this thing that happens. But it sounds like you have this thing in your lifestyle where you're just, maybe you find yourself drawing a lot, casually, or?
It's more at certain times than others. So, like that's why I like the sketchbook. Is it's like I just need a pen in the sketchbook, and usually it might not be for like hours at a time, right? It might be like sitting on the couch watching a show and just like doodling, like while that's happening, right? And eventually that thing just gets really dense, right, and gets filled up. But like I think that's the weird thing. I know you're a printmaker too, but the thing that can be a little bit hard about printmaking is the idea of like over planning stuff, or being really precious about everything you do because you're worried that like, oh, I just messed up that block or something like that, right? And at some point in time in grad school, I actually kind of ran up against that as a barrier to printmaking, is like losing that flexibility of like, well, I want to be able to respond to what I put down on the paper versus like, I've drawn an image.
With that? Like,
no, I think it was.
Just be more creative.
I think it was just because I used to only really do litho, and I think what was really great about litho originally for me was it was kind of mysterious, and it was like, sometimes things screw up and I don't know what happened, but eventually it became really predictable. Like it was like, okay, well, I know I'm going to draw this thing. I've got my colors all planned out. I'm going to print these layers. So it was like doing a paint by numbers thing almost, and there's like the work involved in it, but outside of that, it was became maybe a little too mechanical, and so I switched it up to doing more relief, and then printing in a more sporadic way where I just had blocks that I would move around different spots and then draw in between those and then print again, and it was like allowed a little bit more of a responsive nature with the work rather than just like I made an image that I sketched and now I'm executing it. Yeah. And I do appreciate that, and maybe that's what I liked about the color pencil things, was a little bit more like, okay, what does this thing need now versus like I like totally planned this from the start, you know.
So one thing that I've heard from many printmakers is there's kind of this taboo of, you know, series prints versus prints that you're then altering afterwards with like colored pencil editions and stuff like that. So you can't really repeat that image. It turns into more of a unique piece as opposed to a print edition. So can you kind of just talk about your ethos on?
Yeah, I'm definitely not the stickler printmaker that. I print editions, and I do feel like if I'm making an edition, that edition needs to be pretty similar from print to print, like pretty undetectable. But I don't print big editions usually either, unless it's required for some sort of project. But usually most of the time I'll probably print like 7 total, which is, some printmakers might say that's like a lot of work. And kind of defeats the purpose of making a print, right? But a lot of printmaking for me is more just the marks that are inherent to the medium itself. So like relief, you don't really get the relief marks in anything else. And there's a lot of accidental marks in relief that come up that you can make a relief print where it's very predictable, but you can also like introduce a little bit of like, I'm just going to kind of sloppily carve this thing and then leave some of the stuff that I didn't intend to leave in there, and that becomes part of the image, and we call it like chatter in the image, and sometimes that's what makes the image stronger.
There's also layering that happens naturally through the process of printing, especially if you're doing color, that doesn't necessarily like you don't process the same way if you just have a whole bunch of colored pencils.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, basically I'm fine with variations and additions, and I actually think sometimes that's actually a strength of printmaking, is that you could start with the key that you made into 20 different images, right? So like a student or an artist could print like a main image and then alter that 20 times rather than having this 20 images that are identical, right? So it gives you a little more flexibility where, like, if it's a drawing, that's the drawing, right? Like, I'm not going to go back and draw on top of it or change it. But a print, I could start with the drawing and then change it 20 times if I wanted to see what that looks like in a bunch of different ways.
Interesting. Any other questions or comments?
Do you have to print those large ones with a spoon?
No, we have a 4x8 press.
Oh, nice.
That we got in 2020,
oh, nice.
right before COVID.
Yeah.
So it came in, and then we shut down like a month later. So that's the first really big print that has come off of that press of those two. But yeah, I'm not excited about hand burying a giant print. That's too much work for me. So the press